Have you ever tried to prank someone on April Fool's Day? If so, you're not alone. For hundreds of years, April 1st has been a day filled with pranks. As far back as the 17th century, it was called the Fool's Holiday in Britain. Back then, the pranks were simple, like sending a messenger to another town to meet a person who wasn't real. In 1856, someone in London sent invitations to an event called the Annual Ceremony of Washing the Lions. The invitation was signed and it had a big wax seal on it to make it look really official, and all sorts of people showed up for that fake event. Today, kids try to prank their parents, parents try to prank their kids, and companies even try to prank their customers. A few years ago, Burger King thought they were being funny when they announced on April Fool's Day that they were introducing a new version of the Whopper for left-handed people. It would be called the Left-Handed Whopper. Of course, it was all in good fun. A left-handed Whopper looks just the same as a right-handed regular Whopper. So they were shocked when people from all over the country showed up in their restaurants ordering the left-handed Whopper as if it was a real thing. Of course, April Fool's Day is fun because it's all just for fun. But when Solomon talks about fools and foolishness in the book of Proverbs, it's not a laughing matter. He's dead serious. In the last video, I told you about a few of the key characteristics of people who are wise, according to Solomon. Now, in this video, I want us to take a closer look at what foolishness really looks like. The idea is that if you know what foolishness is, you'll know how to avoid it. To begin with, there are two different Hebrew words that are translated as fool in our English Bibles. Both are used throughout the book of Proverbs, and we can think of them as describing two different categories of people because all foolish people aren't the same. The first word for fool is evil. The word means weak-minded and strong-willed. This person is determined to go his own way and do whatever he wants to do. I like to think of them as goats because goats are stubborn. The second word is kasil. It means mentally lazy and morally sluggish. I like to think of them as sheep because sheep are gullible. So we have the goats and the sheep, and both of them are used as negative examples in the book of Proverbs. They're both called out and exposed for what they really are, foolish. Now let's look at 5 different aspects of life and see how the goats and the sheep handle each of those different areas. The first area to look at is attitude. When it comes to their attitude, goats are cocky. Proverbs chapter 12 verse 15 says, "Fools think their own way is right, but the wise listen to others." Now the word used in this verse for fools is evil. These are the goats. So a weak-minded, strong-willed person doesn't listen because he already thinks he knows it all. He doesn't want any advice, and he definitely doesn't ask for any advice. Why would he? He thinks he already has everything figured out. Proverbs chapter 14 verse 6 tells us about the attitude of a different fool, the kasil, the sheep. They aren't cocky, they're just careless. Here's what the verse says. The wise are cautious and avoid danger. Fools, the gullible ones, the sheep, plunge ahead with reckless confidence. There's no stopping them. They're convinced that there's nothing to worry about. There are warning lights flashing everywhere, red flags are flying all around, but this person doesn't pay any attention and goes right past all of them. They don't care. I think if you could ask him, Solomon would say, "Don't be fooled." It doesn't turn out well for people with attitudes like these. Instead of being cocky and careless, Solomon encourages us to be coachable. Proverbs chapter 9 verse 9 says, "Instruct the wise, and they will become even wiser. Teach the righteous, and they will learn even more." Being willing to learn is a positive thing. It's a sign that you see value in the ideas, experiences, and stories that others have to share. It's a sign that you're coachable, and a coachable person is a wise person. The next area to look at is friends. The goat is described in Proverbs chapter 15, verse 7. The lips of the wise give good advice. The heart of the fool, that's the goat, has none to give. That doesn't necessarily stop the goat from giving advice. If you ask a fool what he thinks about something, he'll definitely tell you. He's not shy about that. But his opinion isn't worth anything. He's a bad friend who gives bad advice. Then the sheep is described in Proverbs chapter 13, verse 20. Walk with the wise and become wise. Associate with fools, these are the sheep, and you'll get into trouble. Think about it. Do you have a friend who's always asking you to do stuff that you know you shouldn't do? Stuff that will get you in trouble if someone finds out. Solomon would tell you that person is acting like a fool. And then I think he would add, don't be fooled. it'll only get you into trouble too. So instead of hanging around people who give bad advice and get into trouble, Solomon encourages us to spend our time with wise people who bring out the best in us, not the worst in us. Think about someone who makes you a better version of you when they're around. Wise people spend their time with people like that. The third area to look at is words. When it comes to words, the goat is mentioned in Proverbs chapter 20, verse 3. Avoiding a fight is a mark of honor. Only fools, the goats, insist on quarreling. Instead of moving away from problematic situations and letting cooler heads prevail, which would be the honorable thing to do, a fool moves toward the problems and pours gasoline on them. He wants to be disruptive. He wants to start fights. Goats are always surrounded by arguments and strife, mostly because they keep stoking the fire instead of putting it out. Now the sheep takes a different approach. He's not loud, he's quiet, spreading lies and stirring up drama behind the scenes. That's the picture that Proverbs chapter 19 verse 1 gives us. Better to be poor and honest than to be dishonest and a fool. A fool is dishonest and spreads lies to anyone who will listen. And I can imagine Solomon saying, "Don't be fooled. If someone gossips to you about someone else, it won't be long before they're gossiping about you to someone else." In contrast to these two foolish ways, Solomon says that the wise way is the way of truth, and wise people speak words of truth. Proverbs chapter 12, verse 22. The Lord detests lying lips, but he delights in those who tell the truth. The truth always wins in the end, so it's best to tell the truth and deal with whatever comes from it. That's the wise thing to do. The next area to look at is family. Proverbs chapter 15, verse 5 says, "Only a fool, a goat, despises a parent's discipline. Whoever learns from correction is wise." The goat goes the way of disrespect. Talking back, breaking family rules, and separating yourself from your family are all signs of foolishness. When your parents discipline you or punish you, it's because they love you. If they didn't love you, they wouldn't care about what you do, and they wouldn't ever discipline you. And then there's the sheep's approach to family, which is similar to the goat. Instead of disrespect, though, the sheep goes harder in the direction of disobedience. Sneaking around the house, sneaking out of the house, sneaking to do what you know you're not supposed to do, all of these things are part of what foolish people do. That's why Proverbs chapter 17 verse 25 says, "Foolish children bring grief to their father and bitterness to the one who gave them birth." A wise person moves in the opposite direction, in the direction of obeying and honoring their parents. According to Proverbs chapter 13 verse 1, a wise child accepts a parent's discipline. So if you want to be wise, start with how you treat your family. And then the last area we'll look at is the area of sin. A wise person moves in the opposite direction of sin because he knows that it promises more than it will deliver. It promises to be sweet, but it ends up being sour. Proverbs chapter 1 sets up a scene where a couple of foolish friends try to get a guy to join them in their foolishness. But the guy is warned, don't go along with them, stay away from their paths. Wise people avoid sin because they know it will only hurt them in the end. But the goats and the sheep, well, they have a different opinion about this, of course. The goat laughs at sin. Proverbs chapter 14 verse 9 tells us, "Fools make fun of guilt, but the godly acknowledge it and seek reconciliation." A fool thinks sin is funny. He thinks it's all a big joke and even does crude things just to get a laugh. He says he's just having a good time, but wise people know better than that. I think Solomon would say, don't be fooled. Sin hurts people, and that's nothing to laugh at. Meanwhile, the sheep is the kind of fool who enjoys sin. He's called out in Proverbs chapter 10 verse 23. Doing wrong is fun for a fool, but living wisely brings pleasure to the sensible. This person is always asking, what's the big deal? And telling you to have a little fun. But wise people get more pleasure from honoring God than chasing sin. And when you think about it, the blessings that come from wisdom go far beyond anything that foolishness can offer. Being coachable will increase your understanding. Having wise friends will bring out your best. Telling the truth will maintain your integrity. Honoring your parents will keep the peace in your family. And avoiding sin will keep you from unnecessary pain. That's why the book of Proverbs makes such a big deal about this. But we all have a choice to make about which way we'll go. We can choose the way of wisdom or the way of foolishness. And I think Solomon would say to you today, don't be fooled. Acting like a fool isn't cool, so keep your eyes on the prize and walk with the wise.